the destruction of my world didn't happen with a bang or a scream. It happened with the mechanical, grinding whine of a rental truck revering into my driveway. I stood behind the screen door, my hand clutching the collar of my housecoat, watching the large U-Haul block out the afternoon sun. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays used to be the days I watered the hydrangeas along the walkway, but today, the tires of that truck were crushing the edge of the flower bed I had tended for 20 years. My son, Caleb Vance, stepped out of the driver's side. He didn't look at the house. He didn't look at the window where he knew I was standing. He looked at his shoes, expensive leather loafers that I knew he hadn't paid for, and then he looked at the woman climbing out of the passenger side. Sloane Kensington. Even from this distance, she looked out of place in my quiet, working-class neighborhood. She was sharp angles and expensive fabrics, her blonde hair coiffed into a style that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She slammed the truck door, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet street, and pointed a manicured finger toward my front porch. My heart didn't just break, it withered. I opened the door before they could knock. I wanted to maintain some semblance of dignity, some illusion that I was still the mistress of this house, even though I knew, deep down, that power had shifted long ago. "Mom," Caleb said. His voice was thin, Reedy. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. "We brought the guys to help. It'll be faster." Two strangers, hired movers, hopped out of the back of the truck. They looked indifferent, just another job, another old lady's house to empty. "Come on in," Sloane said, bypassing me entirely as she stepped into my living room. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She walked into my home like a health inspector looking for a violation. "Okay, let's start with the big pieces. The sectional, the oak cabinet, and definitely the electronics." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Caleb," I whispered, reaching out to touch my son's arm. "The cabinet. Your father built that cabinet with his own hands before you were born." Caleb flinched at my touch. He looked pained, his face pale. "I know, Mom, but—" "Sloane thinks it has a great rustic charm. It'll go perfectly in the den." "It's not rustic, Caleb. It's my life," I said, my voice trembling. Sloane turned around, her eyes hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses, though she was indoors. She slid them down her nose, revealing eyes that held zero warmth, zero empathy. They were calculator eyes, assessing value and discarding the rest. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with a condescension so thick it felt like syrup. "We've talked about this. This is for our new house. It's a fresh start for Caleb and me, and let's be honest." She swept her hand around my living room, gesturing at the things I had dusted and polished for 30 years. "You don't need this anymore. You're just one person. What does one old woman need with all this clutter?" "You don't need this anymore." The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. They weren't just taking furniture. They were taking my history. They were telling me that my time of needing things, of having a life that required space and comfort, was over. I was being archived while I was still breathing. I watched, frozen, as the movers hoisted the heavy oak cabinet. I saw the scratch on the side where Caleb had run his tricycle into it when he was 3. I saw the ring of water stain on the top from where my late husband, Richard, used to set his iced tea while he watched the game. They weren't moving wood, they were hauling away my memories. As they carried it out the door, passing me as if I were a piece of statuary, my legs gave out. I sank onto the one dining chair they hadn't taken yet. The sound of the truck engine idling outside vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up my spine, and suddenly I wasn't 73 years old anymore. The years peeled back, dissolving the scene in front of me, and I was transported back to the rain-slicked asphalt of a hospital parking lot, 50 years ago. I was 23. The rain was coming down in sheets, cold and unforgiving, matching the chill that had permanently settled in my chest. I was holding a 15-year-old Caleb's hand, so tight my knuckles were white. We had just left the room where Richard had taken his last breath, his body broken by the machinery at the factory where he worked. I had walked into that hospital a wife and walked out a widow. I was 23, with empty hands, a broken heart, and a terrified teenage boy looking up at me for answers I didn't have. "Mom," Caleb had asked that night, his voice cracking, suspended between childhood and manhood. "What are we going to do?" Dad said. Dad said we were going to lose the house. I remember dropping to my knees right there on the wet pavement, ignoring the mud soaking into my stockings. I grabbed Caleb by the shoulders and looked him fiercely in the eyes. I was terrified, petrified, but I couldn't let him see it. "We are not losing anything, Caleb," I swore, the rain mixing with the tears on my face. "I promise you, you will never lack for anything. I will work until my fingers bleed if I have to, but you will have a home, you will have an education, and you will have a future. I promise." I was a fool. A loving, desperate fool to believe that a mother's sacrifice is a currency that always buys loyalty. I kept that promise. Oh God, how I kept it. The flashback deepened, shifting from the rain to the small, cramped back room of this very house. My sanctuary, my prison. I became a seamstress. It sounds romantic in storybooks, but in reality, it was a war of attrition waged by my fingers against endless yards of fabric. I closed my eyes in the present, but in my mind, I could hear it. The rhythmic asterisk thrum 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 asterisk of my old Singer sewing machine. It was the soundtrack of Caleb's youth. While he slept in the room upstairs, dreaming of engineering and skyscrapers, I was downstairs at 2:00 a.m., fighting to keep my eyes open under the flickering glow of a yellowish desk lamp. That light, it was always buzzing, a low-level hum that drilled into my temples. My eyes would burn, sandy and dry, blurring as I tried to thread the needle for the 100th time that night. I remembered the physical sensation of the work, the way the heavy velvet of prom dresses would slide over my lap, weighing me down. The sharp, sudden sting of the needle when my concentration slipped, a tiny bead of crimson blooming on my fingertip, quickly sucked away so it wouldn't stain the client's white silk. My hands were covered in those tiny white scars, a map of my labor. My back would scream in protest, a dull fire at the base of my spine from hunching over the machine for 12, 14 hours a day. I made sweet 16 dresses for the neighbors' daughters, girls who had fathers to buy them cars. I hemmed school uniforms for the private school kids, the same school I worked double shifts to send Caleb to, just so he wouldn't feel less than. I sewed curtains, mended work trousers, altered wedding gowns for brides who looked at my tired face with pity before turning back to their own happiness. Everything was for Caleb, always for Caleb. When he came to me at 18, eyes bright with ambition, holding the acceptance letter to the university for engineering, my heart soared. But then came the tuition bill. It was a number that looked like a telephone number to a widow living on hem money. I didn't hesitate, not for a second. I went to my bedroom and opened the small velvet box I kept hidden in the bottom drawer. I remember walking into the pawn shop on 4th Street. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke, dust, and desperation. The man behind the counter, a guy with grease under his fingernails and a loop in his eye, looked at me with boredom. I placed them on the glass counter, one by one. First, the diamond engagement ring Richard had given me. It wasn't huge, but it was flawless. He had saved for 2 years to buy it before asking me to marry him. Next, the gold earrings, heavy antique filigree, that I had inherited from my grandmother. They were the only heirloom I had, the only link to my ancestors. And finally, the watch. The gold watch I had bought Richard on our first anniversary. He had worn it every day until the accident. It still had a small scratch on the crystal from his work. The pawnbroker picked them up, weighing them in his hands, not seeing the love, not seeing the history. He just saw metal and stone. 1,200, he grunted, not even looking up. It's worth much more than that, I whispered, my voice trembling. The ring alone. 1,200, take it or leave it, lady. I got overhead. I took the money. I wrapped the $1,200 in a white handkerchief, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. I walked out into the sunlight, my finger feeling naked without the ring, my heart aching for the watch I'd never wind again. But I paid that first semester's tuition. For 5 years, because engineering is hard and he needed an extra year, I worked like a mule. My hands deformed. My knuckles swelled with early arthritis. My shoulders developed a permanent stoop. But every time Caleb called me from the dorms, excited about fluid dynamics or structural integrity, I smiled. "Mom, I'm learning so much," he'd say. "I'm going to build bridges, Mom." "I know you are, baby," I answer, wrapping a bandage around my bleeding thumb. "I know." And then, the graduation. The memory washed over me, the only bright spot in the darkness of my recollection. I was wearing my wine-colored dress, the only nice thing I hadn't sold or repurposed. I sat in the bleachers, the sun hot on my face, and I clapped until my palms stung when they called his name. Caleb Vance, magna cum laude. He looked so handsome in his black gown, so tall, so far removed from the scared boy in the rainy hospital parking lot. He was a man now, a professional, an engineer. After the ceremony, he found me in the crowd. He hugged me, smelling of cheap cologne and sweat and victory. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, words I had polished and kept in the treasure chest of my heart for years. "Thanks, Mom. I never would have made it without you." I held onto that photo of us from that day. It was on my nightstand. In the picture, I look tired, older than my years, but my smile is radiant. I looked like a woman who had crossed the finish line. I thought the race was over. I thought the struggle was done. I thought we had won. A loud asterisk thud brought me back to the present. One of the movers had bumped the door frame with the refrigerator. My refrigerator. The one I kept full of food, just in case Caleb stopped by. "Watch the paint." Sloane snapped at the mover, not caring about the house, but worried about the appliance. I looked at Caleb. He was standing by the truck, checking his phone, avoiding the sight of his mother sitting on a solitary wooden chair in an emptying room. The contrast between the boy who whispered, "I never would have made it without you," and the man standing in my driveway was too much to bear. That boy had been grateful. This man was. I didn't know who this man was. He was a stranger wearing my son's face, speaking with my son's voice, but moving with the puppet strings that Sloane Kensington pulled. "That's the last of the big stuff in the living room," Sloane announced, walking back in, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floors I had scrubbed on my hands and knees. She looked at me, her expression unreadable behind those glasses. "We're going to grab the TV from your bedroom now, Alina, and those paintings in the hallway." "The paintings." "Sloane, please," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Not the paintings. Richard bought those on our honeymoon. They aren't worth anything to anyone but me." Sloane sighed, a dramatic exhalation of air that signaled her patience was at an end. "Actually, Alina, vintage art is very in right now. They'll look distinct in our hallway. Besides, you won't even notice they're gone. Your eyesight isn't what it used to be, is it?" She signaled the movers. I sat there, paralyzed, as they marched up the stairs. My sanctuary was being dismantled, piece by piece, by the very life I had sacrificed my own to build. The sewing machine, my companion, my tormentor, my savior, sat in the back room, silent. It was one of the few things they didn't want. It was too old, too quaint, too indicative of poverty. They took the fruits of my labor, but they left the tool of my suffering. I watched Caleb walk past the window again, laughing at something on his phone. He looked happy. He looked unburdened. And why shouldn't he be? He had a new house, a new wife, a new life, and all it cost him was his mother. Life, I discovered, has a cruel way of teaching us that promises made in the dark are often forgotten in the light. When Caleb landed the job at the structural engineering firm downtown, I thought the hard part was over. I remember the day he told me. He came bursting through the front door, waving his offer letter like a flag of surrender to our poverty. "They're starting me at 80,000, Mom," he shouted, spinning me around in the hallway. "Plus benefits, plus bonuses." $80,000. To a woman who had spent decades counting pennies in a jar to buy milk, it sounded like the GDP of a small country. I cried. I held him and cried, thinking that finally the weight was lifting. "We can fix the roof now," I said, wiping my eyes with the corner of my apron. "And maybe we can finally take that trip to the Grand Canyon. You remember how we used to look at the pictures in your geography book? We'll do it all, Mom, Caleb promised, his eyes shining with the reflection of a bright future. I'm going to buy you a new house one day. You'll never have to sew another hem again. I held that promise in my heart like a treasure. For the first few months, I lived on a cloud. I continued mending clothes, saving every dollar I earned, dreaming of the day my son would tell me to put down the needle. But the new life didn't bring us closer. It built a wall of silence, brick by brick. It started subtly. Caleb was busy. Important projects, he'd say. Client dinners. Site visits. His visits, which used to be every Sunday without fail for roast chicken, became bi-weekly, then monthly. Then they became pop-ins, 10 minutes of him standing in the doorway, checking his watch, vibrating with the need to be somewhere else. The phone calls changed, too. They used to be long, rambling conversations about his day, about the neighbors, about nothing. Now they were clipped. Hey, Mom, can't talk long, just checking in, you good? Okay, gotta run. I felt like a nuisance. I felt like a dusty old piece of furniture that didn't fit the decor of his new, successful life. But I made excuses for him. He's building a career. I told Mrs. Martha Higgins when she asked why Caleb hadn't come by to fix the porch step. He's a very important man now. Then came the day that changed the atmosphere of my home forever. Caleb called on a Thursday. Mom, I'm coming over Sunday, and I'm bringing someone. I want you to meet her. My heart leaped. A girlfriend? I immediately went into a frenzy of preparation. I spent 3 days deep cleaning the house. I scrubbed the floors until my knees ached. I polished the old silverware. I bought fresh flowers, daisies, because they were cheerful and cheap, and placed them on the dining table. I thought, finally, a daughter-in-law, someone to help me love him, someone to fill this quiet house with laughter, maybe eventually grandchildren. How wrong I was. Sunday afternoon arrived, humid and heavy. I was wearing my best dress, a simple navy blue cotton I had sewn myself, and a clean white apron. I heard a car pull up, not Caleb's practical sedan, but something with a low, throaty engine purr. I watched through the window. Caleb got out, wearing a suit on a Sunday, looking nervous. And then, she emerged. Sloane Kensington. The first thing I noticed was the color. She was wearing a dress the color of coral reef, silk that shimmered in the sunlight. It was cut perfectly to her tall, willow-thin frame. She had blonde hair that didn't move in the breeze. It was a helmet of perfect, expensive styling. But it was the way she looked at my house that stopped my heart. She didn't look at it. She scanned it. Her eyes behind dark sunglasses swept over the peeling paint on the siding, the slightly crooked mailbox, the hydrangeas that needed watering. It was a look of clinical detachment, bordering on disgust. They walked up the path. I heard the sound before I opened the door, click-clack, click-clack. Her heels were stilettos, sharp and loud, echoing on my cement porch like hammers hitting the concrete. Mom, Caleb said as I opened the screen door. His voice was tight, high-pitched. This is Sloane, my girlfriend. It's wonderful to meet you, I said, wiping my hands on my apron one last time before extending my hand. I smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. Caleb has told me, well, he hasn't told me much, but I'm so happy you're here. Sloane lowered her sunglasses just enough for me to see eyes the color of ice water. She looked at my outstretched hand. My hand, rough with calluses, stained slightly with blue chalk from a marking pencil, the hand that had paid for her boyfriend's degree. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. She took my fingers in hers. Her grip was limp, barely a touch. Her nails were long, filed to sharp points, and painted a blood red that looked like claws. Charmed, she murmured. She didn't make eye contact. As she pulled her hand away, she reached into her designer purse, a bag that probably cost more than my entire living room set, and pulled out a small bottle of sanitizer and a tissue. She turned slightly away, pretending to cough, but I saw her wipe her palm. It was a small gesture, a microaggression so swift Caleb probably didn't even register it. But to me, it was a slap in the face. She thought I was dirty. She thought my poverty was contagious. Please come in, I said, forcing my smile to stay plastered on my face, though my chest felt tight. I have coffee brewing, and I made a coffee cake. They stepped into the living room. The air was warm. I didn't have central air conditioning, just a box fan in the window that hummed rhythmically. Sloane stopped in the center of the room, her hands clutching her purse in front of her like a shield. "Oh," she said, "it's cozy." The word sounded like an insult. "It's very warm in here, isn't it? Do you not have AC?" "Just the fan, I'm afraid," I apologized, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down my back, not from heat but from shame. "But there's a breeze if I open the back door." "I see," she said. "Sit, please," I urged, gesturing to the sofa. I had covered the worn spots with crochet doilies. Sloane looked at the sofa as if it were infested. She sat on the very edge of the cushion, her back straight, refusing to lean back. Caleb sat next to her, looking miserable. He kept glancing at Sloane, checking her reaction like a dog waiting for a command. "I'll get the coffee," I said, rushing to the kitchen. I could hear them whispering while the water boiled. The walls in this old house were thin. "Caleb, did you really grow up here?" Sloane's voice was a harsh whisper. "It smells like old paper and mothballs." My hand shook as I reached for the cups. "It's temporary, babe," Caleb replied. His voice was filled with an apology for me asterisk. "You know we're saving for our house. This is just where she lives." This is just where she lives. Not this is my home. Not this is where my mother raised me with love. Just a place to be excused. I composed myself, took a deep breath, and walked back in with the tray. I used my best porcelain cups, the few survivors from a set I'd had for 40 years. "Here we are," I said brightly, placing the tray on the coffee table. "Fresh coffee." Sloane looked at the steaming cup. She didn't reach for it. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "But I don't drink coffee. Caffeine is terrible for the complexion." "Oh," I said, my hands hovering uselessly. "I have tea. I have Lipton." She offered a small, pitying smile. "That's sweet, but no. Do you have any organic green tea? Or maybe just some imported mineral water, sparkling if possible?" My heart sank. Imported mineral water. I drank water from the tap. I only have tap water," I murmured, feeling incredibly small in my own living room. "I can put some ice in it." "Oh, don't worry," she replied, waving her hand dismissively, the diamond bracelet on her wrist catching the light. "I'm not thirsty, actually." She sat there, untouchable, judging. "Caleb tells me you're a seamstress," Sloane said after a long, awkward silence. Her eyes landed on my hands again, examining the scars, the needle pricks, the deformed knuckle on my index finger. "Yes," I said, tucking my hands into my lap to hide them. "For 50 years. "How quaint," Sloane said. She used the word like a weapon. "It must be so hard to get by on that sort of income these days. Hand labor is so undervalued." "I do all right," I said, sitting a little straighter. "It put Caleb through college." I looked at my son, hoping he would jump in. Hoping he would say, asterisk, "Yes, Mom worked 18 hours a day so I could be an engineer." Hoping he would defend my dignity. Caleb looked at the floor. He picked at a loose thread on his trousers. "Yeah," he muttered. "Mom worked hard." Sloane let out a light, tinkling laugh that had no humor in it. She placed a hand on Caleb's knee, a possessive, claiming gesture. "Well, it's a good thing Caleb is successful now," she said, locking eyes with me. "At least he doesn't need you to support him anymore, right? He earns enough to take care of himself and his future." The words were precise. They were calculated. "He doesn't need you." "Of course," I stammered. "I've always wanted him to be independent." "Mom will always be important to me," Caleb mumbled, but his voice was weak, lacking conviction. He sounded like he was reciting a line he didn't quite believe anymore. Sloane tightened her grip on his knee. She leaned into him, her expensive perfume, something heavy and floral, filling the room and overpowering the smell of my coffee cake. "Of course, love," she purred to him, though her eyes remained fixed on me like a predator watching prey. But there comes a time when a man has to leave the nest. It's time for you to start your own family, don't you think? Priorities have to shift. Priorities have to shift. I looked at Caleb. He finally looked up, meeting my eyes for a fleeting second before looking back at Sloane with a gaze of adoration and submission. He nodded. Yeah, Caleb said softly. Yeah, you're right. In that moment, sipping her imaginary mineral water in her coral dress, Sloane Kensington declared war. And looking at my son, I realized I had already lost. The erosion of a 50-year bond doesn't happen like an earthquake. It happens like water dripping on stone. It is slow, persistent, and by the time you realize the foundation has cracked, the damage is irreparable. The months following that disastrous Sunday tea were a masterclass in isolation. I learned the sound of silence intimately. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a phone that refused to ring. Caleb's visits, once the highlight of my week, began to evaporate. First, it was the excuses. I can't make it this Sunday, Mom, he would say, his voice rushing through the receiver. The firm has me on a deadline for the suspension bridge project. I'm swamped. That's okay, honey, I would reply, winding the phone cord around my finger. You need to eat, though. I made lasagna. I'll grab something here. Love you, gotta go. Then the excuses became vaguer. Client meetings, networking dinners, site inspections out of state. I stopped cooking on Saturdays. There was no point in buying a whole chicken or making a pot of stew when I was the only one eating it. My kitchen, once warm with the smells of rosemary and roasting meat, grew cold and sterile. I ate toast. I ate soup from a can. I fed on the scraps of hope that maybe next week he would come. But Sloane was working. She was working on him like a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble, reshaping my son into something harder, colder. I found out the truth on a rainy Tuesday in November. They had stopped by unexpectedly. Caleb needed to pick up his birth certificate for a passport application. They were planning a trip to the Amalfi Coast. I think it's in the box in your old closet, I told him. Go look. Caleb went upstairs. Sloane stayed in the living room, tapping furiously on her phone. I went into the kitchen to make tea, thinking maybe this time she would accept it. I was reaching for the sugar bowl when I heard Caleb come back down the stairs. He must have stopped in the hallway, just out of my sight, but close enough to Sloane. Found it, Caleb said. Good, Sloane replied. Her voice changed. It wasn't the cold tone she used with me. It was soft, wheedling, dangerous. Now we can leave. This place depresses me, Caleb. It smells like desperation. Sloane, keep it down. She's in the kitchen, Caleb whispered, but the thin walls betrayed him. I don't care, she said, her voice dropping lower but sharpening. You saw how she looked at you when we walked in, like a lost puppy. It's pathetic, Caleb. Your mother is completely dependent on you. It's not healthy. She's lonely, Sloane. Dad died a long time ago. Loneliness is a choice at her age, Sloane snapped. But she's using it as a leash. She's turned you into a total mama's boy. Every time she calls with an ache or a pain or a lonely night, she's pulling you back. A mother who truly loves her son wants to see him fly, Caleb. She doesn't keep him tied down with guilt and neediness. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the ceramic sugar bowl trembling in my hands. A leash. Was my love a leash? You have to think about our future, Sloane continued. You can't keep being her emotional husband. You have to be my husband. I know, Caleb said. His voice was resigned. I know. I put the sugar bowl down silently. I didn't make the tea. I waited until I heard the front door close, and then I sank to the linoleum floor and wept until my throat was raw. The final blow came 3 weeks later. I was working on a complicated hem for a wedding dress, white satin that slipped through my fingers like water. It was delicate work, requiring immense concentration, but my mind was a fog of sadness. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. I pricked my finger, a tiny drop of blood bubbling up. I quickly sucked it away, terrified of staining the satin, and went to the door. It was Sloane, alone. She was wearing a beige trench coat that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about autumn in Paris. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't smile. "Hello, Alina," she said, not Mrs. Vance, just Alina. "Sloan," I said, surprised. Is Caleb okay?" "Caleb is fine. He's at work." She pushed past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk, woman to woman." My stomach dropped. "Would you like to sit?" She sat on the edge of the sofa, placing her Birkin bag on her lap as a barrier. She looked around the room, her nose wrinkling slightly at the sight of my sewing machine and the piles of fabric. "I'll get straight to the point," she began. "Caleb and I are getting married soon. We've found a house, a beautiful colonial in the Heights. It's exclusive, gated." "That sounds wonderful," I managed to say. "I'm happy for you." "It is wonderful," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "But it's also expensive. The down payment alone is $200,000. The mortgage will be significant." I nodded, confused. I don't have that kind of money, Sloan, if you're asking." Sloan laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "Oh, God, no. I know you don't have money, Alina. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to discuss expenses." "Expenses?" "Caleb spends a lot of money on you," she said. Her voice was calm, reasonable, which made the cruelty worse. "He pays for your heating oil in the winter. He bought you those expensive arthritis medications last month. He drives over here, wasting gas and time." I felt the blood drain from my face. He offered. The heater broke. I didn't ask." "That's exactly the problem," Sloan interrupted, holding up a manicured hand. "You don't have to ask. You just look pathetic and he feels guilty. That is called emotional blackmail." "No," I whispered. "No, I would never." "Listen to me." She leaned forward, her perfume suffocating me. "We are building a life. We need every penny for our asterisk future, for our children. A mother who truly loves her son would want to see him prosper, wouldn't she? She wouldn't want to be a financial drain on him just because she failed to plan for her own retirement." Failed to plan. I had planned. My plan was to invest every cent I had into Caleb. My retirement plan was his education. My savings account was his degree. "I worked my whole life so he could study," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. "I sold my jewelry. I sewed until my eyes bled." Sloan sighed, shaking her head as if dealing with a toddler. "Stop, just stop. That right there, that is the manipulation I'm talking about. I sacrificed for you, so you owe me." "It's ugly, Alina. It's transactional. Caleb is tired of carrying that debt. He's tired of the guilt." My world crumbled. Was it true? Did Caleb look at me and see a debt collector instead of a mother? Did he pay for my medicine with resentment? He told you this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Sloan didn't blink. "We discuss everything. He feels trapped. He wants to focus on his new family, but he doesn't know how to tell you to back off. So I'm doing it for him." She stood up, smoothing her coat. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, defeated. "Give him space," she said. "Real space. Stop calling him with your little problems. Stop asking him to visit. And for God's sake, stop taking his money. If you can't afford to live in this house, sell it. Go to a state home, but stop bleeding my husband dry." She walked to the door, opening it to the gray afternoon. "I hope we understand each other, Alina. I want a happy family, but that's only possible if you know your place. And right now, your place is in the past." She left. I sat on my sofa for hours. The sun went down, casting the room in shadows, but I didn't turn on the lamp. I replayed her words over and over. Emotional blackmail, transactional, trapped. I began to doubt every interaction I'd ever had with my son. When I hugged him, did he feel suffocated? When I told him I was proud of him, did he hear a demand for repayment? That night, I made a decision. If my love was a burden, I would remove it. If my need was a cage, I would set him free. I stopped calling. When the winter chills set in and the old radiator clanked and failed, I didn't call Caleb. I put on 3 sweaters and slept under 4 blankets. When my arthritis flared up, turning my hands into claws of fire, I didn't fill the prescription. I took aspirin and cried into my pillow. And Caleb, he didn't notice, or if he did, he was relieved. The silence from his end was the confirmation that Sloan was right. He was happier without me. 3 months later, the invitation arrived. Not a visit, not a phone call, a thick cardstock envelope in the mail. Caleb Vance and Sloan Kensington request the honor of your presence. The wedding was held at the downtown Botanical Gardens, a glass cathedral of exotic plants and humidity. I arrived alone. I was wearing my violet dress. I had spent weeks sewing it, using the last of my good silk remnants. It was elegant, high-necked to hide my aging skin, with long sleeves to cover my scarred arms. I walked into the venue and felt like an alien species. The guests were all young, beautiful, and wealthy. The women wore backless gowns and drank champagne from flutes. The men discussed stocks and mergers. An usher looked at my invitation, checked a list, and pointed me to the front row on the left. "Mother of the groom," he said. I sat there, clutching my small handbag. The chair next to me was empty. It should have been Richard's chair. The music started, a string quartet playing something modern and unrecognizable. Caleb walked in. He looked devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo. He stood at the altar, looking nervous, looking happy. He glanced at the crowd. His eyes slid over me. He gave a quick, tight nod, a gesture you'd give a distant aunt, and then looked away. Then Sloan appeared. She was a vision, I had to admit. Her dress was a designer masterpiece, white lace that hugged her figure, costing more than I earned in 5 years. She floated down the aisle, triumphant. When she reached the altar, she took Caleb's hands. I watched my son look at her with a devotion he had once reserved for me. The ceremony was a blur of vows I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears. To have and to hold, forsaking all others. I knew all others included me. During the reception, I sat at my assigned table, Table 1, the family table. It was just me and a few of Sloane's distant relatives who ignored me. I watched the first dance. Caleb held Sloane, spinning her around the floor under the crystal chandeliers. They laughed. They whispered. They were a closed circle, a universe of two. I waited for the DJ to announce the mother-son dance. I had dreamed of this moment since Caleb was a baby. I had imagined dancing to Stand By Me or What a Wonderful World. I had practiced the steps in my living room, humming to myself. The song ended. The DJ came on the microphone. "Let's get this party started. Everyone on the floor." There was no mother-son dance. It had been cut, or maybe Caleb had just forgotten, or maybe Sloane had decided it was too quaint. I sat there, a ghost in a violet dress, watching my son dance with strangers, realizing that I hadn't just lost him to marriage. I had been erased. Sloane glided past my table an hour later, a glass of champagne in her hand. She stopped, leaning down so her face was level with mine. Her breath smelled of expensive wine. "Glad you could make it, Alina," she said, her smile perfect for the photographer flashing a camera nearby. "Congratulations," I managed to say. "You look beautiful." "I know," she said. Her eyes were hard. "We're going to be very happy. We have so many plans, the house, the trips." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "You played your part well today," she whispered, patting my shoulder. "Quiet, unobtrusive, keep it that way." She walked away, her white dress trailing behind her like a conqueror's flag. I left before the cake was cut. I walked out into the cool night air, hailed a cab I couldn't afford, and went back to my silent house. I took off the violet dress, hung it in the closet, and sat in the dark. Knowing that the erosion was complete, the bond was gone, all that was left was the dust. The call that would strip my home bare came on a Tuesday evening. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into the bones of old wood and lonely women. I was darning a sock, a habit I couldn't break, even though socks were cheap, when the phone rang. It was Caleb. My heart did that treacherous little leap it always did, a reflex of hope that I couldn't kill no matter how many times it was disappointed. "Mom," his voice sounded tinny, rehearsed. We're getting close to the move-in date for the new house." "That's wonderful, Caleb," I said, putting down my needle. I'm sure it's going to be beautiful. Yeah, it is. Sloan has done a great job with the design. He paused. I heard him take a breath, the sound of a man steeling himself to do something he knew was wrong. Listen, Mom, we were talking. Sloan and I, we realized. You have a lot of things in that big house that you don't really use anymore. Things that could really help us get started. My grip tightened on the receiver. What kind of things? Well, he started, his speed picking up, like he wanted to get the words out before they choked him. Your TV, the big flat screen in the living room, it's pretty big for just one person, isn't it? Sloan thinks an older person doesn't need something that high-tech, and our media room is empty. I looked across the room at the television. It wasn't just a screen, it was our portal. The memory washed over me like a warm tide. I was back in 1998. Caleb was 6 years old, wearing his Superman pajamas, his hair wet from a bath. It was Saturday night. We didn't have money for movies or restaurants, so Saturday night was movie night. I had made popcorn on the stove. We were squeezed together on the sofa, watching The Lion King for the 50th time. He had fallen asleep with his head heavy on my lap, his small hand clutching my thumb. The blue light of the screen flickered over his sleeping face, and I remembered thinking, I am the richest woman in the world. That TV was the hearth fire we gathered around when the world outside was too expensive to join. Mom, you still there? I'm here, I whispered. The TV, okay. Great, he said, relief washing into his voice. And the refrigerator, the stainless steel one. The refrigerator, I asked, confused. Caleb, I need a refrigerator, I have to eat. I know, he said quickly. But Sloan says that one is practically industrial size. It wastes energy for just one person. We have a smaller one from Sloan's apartment we can swap you. Or you can buy a mini fridge. It would save you on the electric bill. Really, Mom, we're trying to help you downsize. Downsize, a polite word for making someone smaller until they disappear. I looked toward the kitchen, the refrigerator. I saw it not as an appliance, but as a fortress against hunger. I remembered the day Richard bought it just months before he died. He patted the door with pride. So our family will never lack food, Ellie, he had said. For 20 years, that fridge was the heart of my caretaking. It was where I taped Caleb's report cards with magnets. It was where I stored the gallons of milk for his teenage growth spurts, the ingredients for his birthday cakes, the leftovers for his lunches. Opening that door and seeing it full was my way of telling myself I was a good mother. I was providing. Mom, the fridge would really help us. The one in the new house is broken, and we can't afford a new Sub-Zero right now. I suppose, I said, my voice hollow, if it helps you. You're the best, Mom, seriously. Oh, and one last thing, the landscape paintings, the ones in the hallway. My breath hitched. Caleb, no. Sloan loves them, he pressed on. She says they have a vintage pastoral vibe that fits the dining room perfectly. Dad bought them, right? It would be nice to keep them in the family, Mom. If they stay with you, no one sees them. With us, they'll be appreciated. Appreciated. I was 22 again. We were in a small coastal town on our honeymoon. We had no money, but we were drunk on love. We found a street artist selling oil paintings of mountains and rivers. They weren't masterpieces, but to us, they were windows to a world we wanted to explore together. One day, Richard had whispered, kissing my temple as he paid the artist, we'll go to these places, Ellie, just you and me. Those paintings were the only window I had left to the man I loved. They were your father's favorite, I choked out. Exactly, Caleb said, twisting the knife without even realizing he was holding it. So let his son have them. Don't be selfish, Mom. You've looked at them for 40 years. Let us enjoy them now. You've lived your life. Now it's our turn. You've lived your life. The sentence landed with the weight of a coffin lid. It was the same thing Sloan had said. My life was in the past tense. I was a husk, a placeholder waiting to expire, hoarding resources that the living needed. Okay, I said. The word was a surrender. Okay, Caleb, take them, take it all. Awesome, we'll be there in 2 weeks with a truck. Thanks, Mom, love you. He hung up. The next 2 weeks were a slow funeral. I lived in a state of suspended grief. I found myself walking through the house, touching the things that were leaving. I cleaned the television screen with a microfiber cloth, wiping away the dust, but also wiping away the phantom fingerprints of the past. I emptied the refrigerator. It was a humiliating process. I threw away jars of pickles that were half-eaten, frozen vegetables that had been waiting for a family dinner that would never happen. I scrubbed the shelves until they gleamed. I was preparing my appliance for its new mistress. I imagined Sloane opening it, judging my cleaning skills, filling it with her organic kale and sparkling water. I defrosted the freezer, watching the ice melt like tears, leaving a puddle on the kitchen floor that I mopped up on my knees. I stood before the paintings for hours. I memorized every brushstroke. The way the blue of the river faded into the green of the pines. The way the artist had caught the light on the mountain peak. I tried to inhale the image, to burn it onto the back of my eyelids so that when they were gone, I could still see them. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the paintings. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep you." The day arrived. I heard the truck before I saw it, that grinding, metallic roar I described before. But now, knowing what was coming, it sounded like a tank rolling into occupied territory. Caleb and Sloane arrived with the two movers. The air in the house changed the moment they stepped inside. It became brisk, efficient, transactional. "Okay, boys," Sloane directed, clapping her hands. She was wearing tight jeans and a cashmere sweater, sunglasses perched on her head. She didn't look at me. "TV first, be careful with the screen." I stood in the corner of the living room, hands clasped tight in front of me, trying to make myself as small as possible. I watched them unplug the television. The screen went black, reflecting the room one last time before they lifted it. When they carried it out, the space where it had stood for 10 years seemed to scream. The stand was covered in a fine layer of gray dust, marking the exact rectangular footprint of the TV. It looked like a crime scene outline. Caleb avoided me. He was busy coiling cables, his face flushed. He knew. Somewhere deep inside that expensive suit, the boy I raised knew this was wrong, but he was too weak to stop it. Next was the kitchen. "This is heavy," one of the movers grunted, tilting the refrigerator back on a dolly. "Careful with the floor," Sloane snapped. "Not my asterisk floor, just the asterisk floor." I watched my kitchen being gutted. The refrigerator left a gaping hole in the cabinetry. Behind it, the linoleum was a different color, brighter, yellowish, untouched by the sun for 2 decades. It was a scar from the past, exposed to the light. Balls of dust and a single, long-lost magnet from a pizza place lay there, exposed and pathetic. Without the hum of the compressor, the kitchen fell into a dead silence. The heartbeat of the house had stopped. Finally, the paintings. Sloane walked down the hallway, pointing. That one, and that one." I followed them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my body in front of the movers and shout, "These are mine! This is my life!" But the voice of my son echoed in my head, "Don't be selfish, Mom." So I stood silent. They lifted the frames from the hooks. The wall behind them was a pale, creamy white, while the rest of the hallway had yellowed with age. 3 perfect, pale rectangles remained on the wall. Ghosts. "They'll look gorgeous in the dining room," Sloane said to Caleb, ignoring the fact that she was stripping the walls of his childhood home bare. "Yeah," Caleb said. He glanced at the pale spots on the wall and quickly looked away. "Yeah, babe, perfect." It took less than an hour to dismantle 40 years of history. The truck was loaded. The back door slammed shut with a finality that rattled my teeth. Caleb turned to me on the porch. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. Sloane was already in her car, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, revving the engine impatiently. "Well," Caleb said. He wouldn't look at my eyes, he looked at my shoulder. "Thanks for this, Mom. Really, it's a huge help." "I'm glad," I said. My voice sounded like dry leaves scraping on pavement. "I just want you to be happy." "We will be," he said. He leaned in and gave me a hug. It was a mechanical hug. His arms were stiff. He didn't squeeze. He didn't linger. He patted my back twice, asterisk pat, pat asterisk, the universal signal for "I want to leave now." He pulled away before I could even rest my head on his chest. I promise we'll come visit soon, he lied. Drive safe, I whispered. He jogged to the truck, relief evident in his stride. He hopped into the cab, the engine roared to life, and he pulled away. Sloane followed in her silver sedan. Neither of them looked back. I stood on the porch until they turned the corner and vanished. Then I turned and walked back inside. The silence hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a vacuum. It was the silence of a tomb. I walked into the living room. The dust outline of the TV stared at me. I walked into the kitchen, the empty cavern where the fridge had been gaped like a missing tooth. I walked down the hallway. The 3 pale rectangles on the wall looked like eyes, watching me, judging me for my failure to protect them. My footsteps echoed. Clack, clack, clack. The house sounded hollow. It had been stripped of its organs, leaving only the shell. I sat on the sofa, the only thing they hadn't wanted because of the cat's scratches on the side, and looked at the empty room. I'm here, I said aloud, just to hear a voice. The walls threw the words back at me, flat and dead. You don't need this anymore. I pulled my knees to my chest, curling into a ball in the center of the mausoleum that used to be my home, and waited for the darkness to come. The silence that filled my house after the truck drove away wasn't empty. It was heavy. It had a physical weight, like a damp wool blanket thrown over my head, muffling the air and making it hard to breathe. For the first few nights, I realized just how much I had relied on that television. It wasn't about the shows. I didn't care about the news or the sitcoms. It was the presence. The low murmur of voices that filled the corners of the room, the flickering blue light that pushed back the shadows. Without it, the house came alive with noises I had never noticed before. The settling of the foundation sounded like footsteps in the hallway. The wind whistling through the loose sash in the dining room window sounded like a sigh of disappointment. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, asterisk tick, tock, tick, tock asterisk, became a countdown to nothing. I sat in the dark. Electricity cost money, and without the distraction of the TV, the lamps felt too bright, too exposing. I sat on my sofa, staring at the dust rectangle where the screen used to be, and I felt the solitude wrap its cold fingers around my throat. But the silence was bearable compared to the hunger. I hadn't realized how much of a luxury a refrigerator was until it was gone. In my mind, I had justified it. Asterisk Caleb needs it. I'm just one old woman. But the reality was a daily humiliation. I couldn't store milk. I couldn't keep cheese. I couldn't make a pot of soup to last the week because it would sour on the counter in the summer heat. My life shrunk to a daily, exhausting loop. Every morning, I had to walk the 6 blocks to the market. My knees, swollen with arthritis that I could no longer afford to medicate, screamed with every step on the pavement. I pushed my wire shopping cart, looking for all the world like a beggar. At the deli counter, I became a spectacle of pity. Just 2 slices of ham, please, I would whisper to the butcher, Mr. Henderson. 2 slices, Mrs. Vance. That's barely a sandwich, he'd say, his brow furrowing. It's all I need today, and 1 tomato, a small one. I would walk home in the heat, clutching my small paper bag. By the time I got back, I was exhausted. I would eat the ham on a piece of dry bread. Butter was impossible to keep without melting, and drink lukewarm tap water. Within 3 weeks, my clothes began to hang off me. My skirts, once snug, required safety pins at the waist to keep from sliding down. My reflection in the bathroom mirror, the only mirror left in the house, showed a stranger. My cheeks were sunken. My eyes were ringed with dark, purple bruises of insomnia. My hair, which I used to dye a soft chestnut, was growing out in wiry, unkempt gray patches because I couldn't afford the box dye, let alone a salon. I looked like what I was becoming, a ruin. And because misery loves company, my work began to suffer. Sewing requires steady hands and sharp eyes. I had neither anymore. My hands shook constantly, from low blood sugar, from anxiety, from the sheer heartbreak that vibrated in my nerves. My eyes were perpetually swollen from the nights I spent crying into my pillow, making it impossible to focus on the fine weave of fabrics. The complaints started as whispers, and grew into confrontations. Mrs. Gable, a regular client for 10 years, came to pick up her daughter's prom dress. I handed it to her, wrapped in plastic, trying to hide the tremor in my fingers. She unzipped the bag and inspected the hem. Her face fell. "Alina," she said, her voice tight, "look at this stitch. It's crooked, and there's a pucker in the satin right here." I squinted, my heart hammering. She was right. The hemline wobbled like a drunkard's path. I can fix it," I stammered, reaching for the dress. "Give me an hour. My eyes are just a little tired today." "I don't have an hour," Mrs. Gable said, pulling the dress away. "Prom is tonight. I'll have to tape it." She looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse, pity mixed with annoyance. "This isn't the quality I pay for, Alina. Maybe you should take a break. You seem overwhelmed." She paid me half of what we agreed upon. I didn't argue. I watched her leave, knowing she wouldn't come back. That was the beginning of the end. One by one, the phone stopped ringing with orders. My livelihood, the meager stream of cash that kept the lights on and the dry bread on the table, was drying up. I was starving, I was broke, and I was alone. It was Mrs. Martha Higgins who forced me to face reality. Martha lived next door. She was a widow too, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and a nose for trouble. She had seen the truck. She had seen the furniture leave, and she had watched me wasting away. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting long, lonely shadows across my living room floor, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the sharp, demanding rap of a bill collector. It was a gentle, persistent tapping. I didn't want to answer. I was wearing a housecoat that was stained with tea, and I hadn't washed my hair in days. But Martha called out. "Alina, I know you're in there. I can see your light. Open up, I've got my hands full." I opened the door a crack. The smell hit me instantly, savory, rich, overwhelming, roasted chicken, garlic, thyme. My stomach let out a growl so loud it vibrated against my ribs. Martha pushed the door open with her hip. She was holding a large casserole dish covered in foil. "I made too much," she lied. Her voice was brisk, no nonsense. "My grandkids didn't show up, and I'm not eating all this chicken and rice by myself. It'll go to waste." She walked past me into the kitchen, setting the dish on the counter. Then she stopped. She stared at the gaping hole where the refrigerator used to be. She looked at the counter, empty except for a loaf of stale bread and a box of tea bags. She looked at me, really looked at me, taking in my skeletal frame and the safety pin holding up my housecoat. "Alina," she said softly, "where is your fridge?" I pulled my housecoat tighter, shame burning my face. It broke. I sent it out for repairs." "Repairs," Martha repeated. She walked over to me and took my hands. Her hands were warm and fleshy, mine felt like dry twigs. "Alina, I saw the U-Haul. I saw Caleb." I looked down, tears stinging my eyes. He needed it for the new house. "They're just starting out, Martha. They need help." "He needed your refrigerator?" Martha asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "He makes 6 figures, Alina. He drives a Lexus." "And he took his mother's refrigerator." "He didn't know," I defended him, the lie tasting like ash. "He didn't know I couldn't replace it immediately. It's temporary. I'm remodeling." Martha didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hands, her eyes filled with a sadness that broke me more than her anger. "Sit down," she commanded gently. She uncovered the dish. The steam rose up, filling the kitchen with the scent of home. She found a fork and a plate, rinsing the dust off them in the sink, and served me a mountain of food. "Eat," she said. I tried to be polite. I tried to eat slowly. But the first bite of tender chicken and salty, buttery rice hit my tongue and I lost control. I ate like a starving animal. I shoveled the food into my mouth, not caring that sauce was getting on my chin, not caring that I was sobbing between bites. Martha sat across from me, watching silently. She didn't judge. She just poured me a glass of water and pushed it toward me. "Children grow up," she murmured, almost to herself. "They forget who fed them, but this is cruelty, Alina. This isn't forgetfulness." "He loves me," I choked out through a mouthful of rice. listens to her too much. If he loved you, Martha said, her voice hard as flint, you wouldn't be starving in the dark. She left an hour later, leaving the leftovers and a promise to check on me tomorrow. But her words stayed. If he loved you, you wouldn't be starving. That night, the silence was worse than ever. My stomach was full for the first time in weeks, but my heart was hollow. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. I was 73 years old. I had $78 left in my tin can. I had no food storage. I had no work. I needed help. I stared at the phone on the side table. It was the only line of communication I had left. I hadn't called Caleb in months, terrified of being the burden Sloan accused me of being. But surely if he knew I was eating dry bread, if he knew his mother was disappearing. Caleb was my son. I had wiped his tears. I had bandaged his knees. I had sold my wedding ring for his future. He couldn't be this heartless. It was Sloan. It was always Sloan. But if I could just talk to him, bypass her poison, he would help. My hand trembled as I lifted the receiver. It was 9:00 p.m. They would be awake. I dialed the number. I knew it by heart. I had dialed it 1,000 times to say good night. I love you. Drive safe. Ring. 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 My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Please pick up, Caleb, please. Hello. The voice was cool, clipped and unmistakably female. Sloan. My courage faltered, but desperation propped me up. Sloan, I said, my voice shaking. It's Alina. There was a pause, a silence so loud I could hear the static on the line. It's 9 o'clock at night, Alina, she said. No greeting, just an accusation. I know, I'm sorry, I whispered. I really need to speak to Caleb. Is he there? He's busy, she said instantly. We're watching a movie in the media room. We're relaxing. Relaxing, probably on my television. Please, Sloan, I begged, hatting the wine in my voice. It's important. I wouldn't call if it wasn't. What is it? She snapped. Did the house burn down? Are you in the hospital? No, I need help, I admitted, the shame burning my throat. I'm having trouble with the food. Without the refrigerator, I can't keep anything, and my sewing orders have stopped, and I don't know what to do. I waited for a gasp. I waited for her to say, oh my God, Alina, we'll be right there. Instead, I heard a sigh, a long, exasperated exhale through the nose. We talked about this, Alina, she said, her tone dropping into that condescending lecture mode. We discussed boundaries. You told Caleb you were fine. You agreed to give us the furniture. You said, take it, I don't need it. You can't change your mind now just to get attention. I'm not trying to get attention, I cried, tears spilling over. I'm hungry, Sloan, I'm alone in the dark. Stop it, she hissed. Do you have any idea how manipulative you sound? I'm hungry, I'm in the dark. You're a grown woman. If you can't take care of yourself, sell the damn house. But do not call my husband and guilt trip him because you're bored and lonely. Let me talk to my son, I sobbed. He's my son, he wouldn't want this. He's my husband, she countered, her voice like ice and steel. And he is tired, Alina. He works all day to pay for our life. He doesn't need to deal with your drama. I'm protecting him from this toxic behavior. Please. Don't call again unless it's a medical emergency. And I mean real *1. Good night, Alina. Click. The line went dead. The drone of the dial tone filled my ear, a monotonous, indifferent hum that signaled the end of my world. I dropped the receiver. It dangled by the cord, swinging back and forth, hitting the table leg with a dull thud, thud, thud. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just slid off the chair onto the floor. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around my thin, shivering body. Sloan had won. She had built a fortress around my son, and I was on the outside. But it wasn't just that. Caleb was in the house. He was there. He might have heard the phone ring. He might have asked, "Who is it, babe?" And when she said, "Just a telemarketer or your mom being dramatic," he had shrugged and turned back to the movie. Back to my TV. He had let her be the gatekeeper. I cried then. I cried not for the hunger or the cold or the fear of the future. I cried for the past. I cried for the baby I had held in the rain. I cried for the boy who wanted to build bridges. That boy was dead. He had been consumed by a man who valued a stainless steel refrigerator more than his mother's survival. I lay on the floorboards, the darkness of the house pressing down on me, and for the first time in 73 years, I wished I wouldn't wake up. I had reached the bottom of the well, and when I looked up, there was no light. There was only the dial tone, echoing in the silence. The envelope arrived on a Friday, 3 days after the phone call that had shattered what little spirit I had left. I almost didn't check the mail. What was the point? The mailbox was just a mouth that spat out demands I couldn't meet. Overdue electricity notices, water bill warnings, flyers for grocery stores where I could no longer afford to shop. But habit is a hard thing to break. I walked down the driveway, my slippers shuffling against the gravel, shielding my eyes from the sun that felt too bright for a world this dark. I opened the metal box and pulled out a stack of white envelopes. Bill, junk bill. And then at the bottom, something different. It was thick, cream-colored, the kind of paper that has weight, that feels like fabric between your fingers. It smelled faintly of vanilla and expensive ink. There was no plastic window, no typed address. Instead, my name, *Mrs. Eleanor Vance *, was written in a script so elegant, so precise, that it looked like artwork. My heart gave a painful thud. A law firm. The law offices of Silas Prescott and Associates. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. Had I forgotten a debt? Was the city condemning the house? Had Sloan found some legal way to force me out, to finish the job she had started? My hands shook so badly I dropped the other letters into the dirt. I didn't bother picking them up. I clutched the cream envelope to my chest and walked back into the house, feeling like a prisoner walking to the gallows. I sat at the kitchen table. The silence of the house was waiting for me. I used a dull butter knife to slit the seal, terrified of what I would find. Inside, there was a formal cover letter typed on letterhead, and behind it, a smaller, personal envelope. I read the cover letter first, my breath shallow. Dear Mrs. Vance *, I am writing to you on behalf of my client, Mr. Harrison Thorne. He has employed my firm to locate you, a task that has taken us considerable time. Mr. Thorne requested that I forward the enclosed personal correspondence to you immediately. If you are amenable, he wishes to arrange a meeting. Sincerely *. Silas Prescott. Harrison Thorne. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. I dropped the typed letter and picked up the handwritten one. I knew that handwriting. It had been 55 years, but I knew the loop of the L and the sharp cross of the T. I had boxes of notes written in this script hidden in the attic, notes passed in history class, letters sent from summer camp, poems written on napkins. Harrison, my first love, the boy with the gentle eyes and the ambitious heart who had loved me before I was a widow. Before I was a mother, before I was a burden. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. My dearest Eleanor, *. I hope this letter finds you, and more importantly, I hope it finds you well. I know it has been a lifetime. We are strangers now, separated by decades, by miles, by the lives we built apart. But I am writing this because, for me, you never truly left. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. Dearest Eleanor. No one had called me dearest in 20 years. My private investigator finally found your address last week. You don't know how many nights I have lain awake, wondering what became of the most beautiful, kind-hearted girl I ever knew. Did she paint? Did she travel? Did she keep that spark in her eyes that used to light up the gymnasium at the homecoming dance? The tears began to fall, hot and fast, splashing onto the table. He remembered the spark. He remembered the girl I used to be, not the hollow shell I had become. 2 years ago, I lost my wife, Catherine. She was a wonderful woman, and we had a good life. I loved her, and I honored her. But she knew. She knew that a piece of my heart had been given away long ago to a girl in a lavender dress who promised to wait for me until life got in the way. I closed my eyes, and suddenly the smell of stale air and dust in my kitchen vanished. I was 18 again. I was standing by the lake on the edge of town, the fireflies blinking in the tall grass. Harrison was holding my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones. He was leaving for medical school in Boston. I was staying behind to care for my sick mother. "I'll come back for you, Ellie," he had sworn. "Wait for me." But life hadn't waited. My mother died. I met Richard, a steady, kind man who offered me safety when I was grieving. By the time Harrison came back, I was married. I was pregnant with Caleb. We had passed each other on Main Street once, a silent exchange of glances that carried a lifetime of regret, and then we never spoke again. I looked back at the letter. Catherine made me promise on her deathbed that I wouldn't spend my remaining years alone. She told me to find you, to see if the story had an ending we never got to write. I am 75 years old, Alina. I have money, I have properties, I have seen the pyramids and the Great Wall, but I am profoundly lonely. I wake up in a house that is too big with silence that is too loud. I have no one to pour coffee for, no one to tell about the book I'm reading. If you are alone, and I pray I am not intruding on a happy marriage, I would like to see you, just once, to see if the years have been kind to you and to tell you in person that you are still the standard by which I measure beauty. Please contact Mr. Prescott if you are willing. He will handle everything. Yours, always asterisk. Harrison. I read it 3 times, then 4. I looked down at myself. I was wearing a stained housecoat. My hands were gnarled claws. My face, reflected in the dark window, was gaunt and gray. The standard by which I measure beauty. "Oh, Harrison," I whispered to the empty room. "You don't want to see me, not like this." The shame washed over me. He remembered a vibrant girl. If he saw me now, starving, abandoned by my own son, living in squalor, he wouldn't see Alina. He would see a tragedy. He would see a failure. I almost tore the letter up. It felt cruel to hope. It felt dangerous. But then I looked at the empty space where the refrigerator used to be. I looked at the dust outline of the TV. I thought of Sloane's voice on the phone. "You played your part." Quiet, unobtrusive. I was dying here, slowly, invisibly. If I didn't make this call, I would die in this chair, and the only person who would find me would be a bill collector. Harrison offered a lifeline, not just a way out of poverty, but a way back to personhood asterisk. He remembered me. He wanted asterisk me asterisk. I stood up. My knees cracked, but I stood straighter than I had in months. I walked to the bathroom and washed my face with cold water. I combed my wiry gray hair. I put on the only clean blouse I had left. I picked up the phone. My hand shook, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. I dialed the number on the letterhead. "Law offices of Silas Prescott. How may I direct your call?" A crisp voice answered. "Hello," I said. My voice sounded rusty, unused. I cleared my throat. "My name is Alina Vance. I received a letter from Mr. Prescott regarding Mr. Thorne." There was a pause, and then the receptionist's voice changed. It became warm, almost excited. "Oh, Mrs. Vance, please hold for one moment. Mr. Prescott has been waiting for your call." Seconds later, a deep baritone voice came on the line. "Mrs. Vance, this is Silas Prescott." "Yes," I said. "I read the letter." "I am so relieved," he said, and he sounded genuine. "Harrison, Mr. Thorne has been packing my office floor for a week hopping, you would call. May I ask, would you be willing to meet him?" I looked around my empty kitchen. Yes, I would like that very much." "Excellent, wonderful. Mrs. Vance, could you come to my office this afternoon? I know it's short notice, but Mr. Thorne wants to arrange a dinner for tomorrow, and there are some logistics we'd like to handle." "I can come," I said. "I can take the bus." "Nonsense," Mr. Prescott said firmly. "I will send a car for you. Does 1 o'clock suit you?" "A car, for me." 1 o'clock is fine," I whispered. The car was a black Lincoln Town car. The seats were soft leather, and the air conditioning was a heavenly reprieve from the stifling heat of my house. I sat in the back, clutching my purse, watching the city pass by. We drove into the financial district, a world of glass and steel towers that I hadn't visited in decades. The driver opened the door for me. "Right this way, ma'am." I walked into the lobby of the building. It smelled of polished marble and lilies. I felt painfully conscious of my worn shoes and my old skirt, but the receptionist smiled at me as if I were royalty. "Mr. Prescott is expecting you in the penthouse suite." The elevator ride made my ears pop. When the doors opened, I stepped into an office that looked more like a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, Persian rugs, mahogany desks. Mr. Prescott came out to meet me. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than my house. But he didn't look at me with Sloane's eyes. He didn't scan my clothes for value. He looked me in the eye and smiled with warmth. "Mrs. Vance," he said, taking my hand gently. "It is an honor, truly." He led me to a leather chair by the window. The view of the city was breathtaking. I felt like I was floating above my miserable life. "Harrison was ecstatic when I told him you called," Mr. Prescott said, sitting opposite me. "He wanted to be here himself, but he was afraid he might overwhelm you. He wants the first meeting to be perfect." "He remembers a girl from 50 years ago," I said, my voice trembling. I'm afraid I'm not that girl anymore, Mr. Prescott. I'm old. I'm tired." Mr. Prescott leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mrs. Vance, Harrison doesn't want a memory. He wants you asterisk. He knows time has passed. He's lived a full life just as you have. But he speaks of you with a reverence I have rarely seen." He opened a leather folder on his desk and slid a heavy cream envelope toward me. "Mr. Thorne asked me to give you this. It contains the details for dinner tomorrow night. The Palace Hotel, 7:00 p.m. The Palace Hotel. It was the most exclusive place in the city. I hadn't even walked past it in years. "And," Mr. Prescott continued, sliding a rectangular slip of paper across the mahogany, "he also asked me to give you this." I looked down. It was a cashier's check, made out to Alina Vance. For $500. I recoiled as if the paper were hot. "No," I said, pushing it back. I can't take money. I'm not a charity case." My pride flared up, hot and fierce. Sloane's voice echoed in my head. Financial drain. Burden. I wouldn't let Harrison think I was meeting him for his money. "Mrs. Vance, please," Mr. Prescott said, his voice gentle but firm. He pushed the check back, resting his finger on the edge. "This isn't charity, and it's not payment." "Then what is it?" "It's a request," he said. "Harrison told me she's a proud woman. She won't ask for anything. But I want our first night to be magical. I want her to feel as beautiful as I know she is. He wants you to buy a new dress. Not because your clothes aren't fine, but because he knows the joy of preparing for a special evening. He wants to spoil you, Alina. Please, let him." I looked at the check. $500. It was more money than I had seen in 6 months. It could buy groceries for weeks. It could fix the heater. But that wasn't what it was for. It was for a dress. It was permission to be beautiful again. It was permission to stop being a surviving animal and start being a woman. I looked up at Mr. Prescott. His eyes were kind, devoid of judgment. He was giving me an out, a way to accept without losing my dignity. He really wants this," I asked softly. "He insisted," he said. "Tell her she deserves to shine." I reached out, my trembling fingers touching the cool paper of the check. I picked it up. It felt light, but it carried the weight of a new beginning. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I left the office with the envelope in my purse and the check in my hand. The elevator ride down felt different. I wasn't the same terrified old woman who had ridden up. I had a date. I had a name. And for the first time in a long, long time, I had hope. I walked out into the busy city street. The sun was shining, and instead of hiding from it, I lifted my face to the warmth. I wasn't just Alina the widow, or Alina the discarded mother. I was Harrison Thorne's dearest Alina, and I had a dress to buy. The check Harrison sent wasn't just for $500. It was permission to exist again. For the first time in years, I stopped counting pennies and started counting on myself. I took a bus to the high-end district, walking into a boutique with my head held high. I bought a dress, not gray or black, but a shimmering lavender silk that made me feel like royalty. After a trip to the salon, the woman in the mirror wasn't the haggard, abandoned mother anymore. She was a leaner Vance, and she was beautiful. When the black town car arrived that evening, my neighbor Martha Higgins dropped her dish towel in shock. I didn't look back at my empty, silent house. I got in the car and rode toward my future. At the Palace Hotel, Harrison Thorne was waiting. He didn't see an old woman, he saw the girl he had loved 50 years ago. "You are more beautiful than I remembered," he whispered. Over dinner, we didn't just catch up, we reconnected souls. He asked me to move into his estate not as a guest, but as his partner. I said yes. I left the dust outlines and the memories of Caleb's betrayal behind and stepped into a world of peace, gardens, and silk sheets. But the universe demands balance. 3 weeks later, while I was sipping coffee on Harrison's terrace, my phone rang. It was Caleb. He was frantic, sobbing, standing outside my old, empty house. "She left me, Mom," he cried. "Sloan is gone." The truth came out in a rush of poetic justice. Sloan hadn't just left. She had run off with Caleb's boss, draining their bank accounts and selling everything they owned, including the paintings she had stolen from me. Caleb was destitute. He drove to Harrison's mansion in a beat-up car, looking broken. He begged to move in, to have me save him one last time. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but I held Harrison's hand and stood my ground. "I forgive you because I am your mother," I told him. "But I will not be your safety net anymore. You have to stand on your own 2 feet. I sent him away with my love, but not my money. It was the wake-up call he needed. 6 months later, Harrison and I were married in the garden. Caleb was there, humble and working a modest job, finally free of Sloane's toxic influence. Sloane, we later heard, was abandoned by her lover when the money ran out, a lonely ending for a cruel woman. 5 years have passed since then. I am 78, and I have never been happier. Harrison and I started the Second Bloom Foundation *** to help elderly women who have been abandoned by their families, ensuring no one else has to eat dry bread in the dark. I sit on my terrace now, surrounded by love, and I realize the truth. It is never too late. No matter how old you are or how much you have lost, you are not disposable. You are worthy of a second chance. All you have to do is be brave enough to claim it.